On this week's episode, I'm joined by our Proud of Portugal expert, Ricardo Monteiro, for the 4th edition of our Proud of Portugal episode. And we discuss, amongst other things, all the things that make us proud of Portugal, including current events, historical events, architecture, and something made in Portugal that was ruthlessly stolen by an American fashion designer. Welcome back, or welcome to another episode of Portugal, The Simple Life. And I'm delighted once again to be joined here by our Proud of Portugal expert, Ricardo Monteiro. Ricardo, hello, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you? Thank you for having me again.
I'm very well. I'm upset with you because you were here in my neighborhood and we didn't have lunch. And we still have never met in person. And that's a real injustice.
It's a promise, though. The next time I'm around, I'll give you a call. Definitely.
Please. Okay? Please. That'll be great.
Okay.
Ricardo, I think this is our 5th Proud of Portugal, 5th or 4th Proud of Portugal episode.
I think it's the 4th, but anyway.
4th one, okay. Yeah. So I'm enjoying it. I hope you're enjoying it still as well.
I'm enjoying it enormously. It's always a pleasure, really.
Wonderful. But maybe you can start off telling us something that we don't already know about you.
Well, about me and about Portugal in general, I spoke Spanish and French before I spoke English. And that's for a couple of reasons. I spoke Spanish before I spoke French because I was born in a town near the border of Spain, which is called Covilhã. And we got signal from the Spanish TV a few years before we got it from Portuguese TV. So we had our TV broadcaster at home was RTVE, which is Radio Televisión de España. So I learned Spanish by listening to Spanish TV and actually became quite fluent at it. And that was very helpful later in life because I lived in Madrid for a couple of years and then, of course, all across Latin America. So that's one thing. The other thing is that then I learned French because French was the language taught at school, like after year 5, year 6. Which we were divided into 3 what we used to call cycles. So the first cycle was really primary school, 4 years, and then you would go to the liceo, which is a lyceum if you want, and then that would go on for another 7 years, and then you would move on to university. And the second cycle, which was the lyceum, we started learning French at the age of 9. Okay, so I learned French for about, I believe it was 5 years before I moved on to English, and also became quite good at it. And later in life, it became quite helpful because my final employer was Havas, which is a French company, and they were all quite amazed at the fact that I could speak French, and English, and it's something that always baffles the French is when somebody actually speaks their language. And they always ask, have you ever lived in France? No, I never lived in France. But, where did you learn French? And at school. Oh, my God, it was like, So that's something that he didn't know about me. So Spanish and French before I ever learned English.
And that's helpful because you've got family in Spain as well. I think one of your sons.
And I've now got my 3 sons actually now live in Spain, but that's recent in life though. So my 3 sons and all of my grandchildren live in Madrid, which is it's a coincidence, I mean, as a matter of fact, one of them is moving out. He's probably going to Chicago, but that's it. That's life. Okay, so here we go.
So next one, as we start normally, current event that makes you proud of Portugal.
Yeah, well, people don't like to talk about politics because it's always such a contentious subject. But I'm quite proud of the way that politics actually moves around in Portugal. There are 2 things that stand out to me in this last couple of months. One is the vote for municipalities, as you know. And there was a shift of popular mood there. Now, I'm not making any comments on, it's nice that we're moving the other way. It's not that. But it is the fact that the Portuguese people is always very wise in the way they vote, and they never move to extremes, even though there are now some extreme, at least one far right, party. I do think that we move in the center. The Portuguese move in the center. It's very funny because when you've got, like in this case, the Socialist Party that have been in power for 6 years, after 6 years, they always, they raise their hand and say, "Well, enough." Enough. And they ever so slightly, they move in the other direction. And I'm quite sure, as we sit here, that in 6 years' time, if the other guys come in, the same thing will happen. And ever so slightly, we will move again to the left. So, and the fact that this happens within a peaceful environment, it's never something that involves, the kind of rough politics of rough and tumble like you see in the United States, or even in France, or even in the UK. It's all very quiet and I think very civilized. And even now that we are without a government, it is quite amazing that the country continues to function, and institutions, fulfill their roles the way they're supposed to. And it makes me feel proud of Portugal because even though we have been living in democracy for the last 45, 46 years, the truth is that democracy for most of us, for people like me, it's something of new. I was born in dictatorship, and with the idea that I would go to Angola or Mozambique, as my brothers did, to fight a war, a colonial war. That did not happen. And then we moved to democracy. And for me, I think that the way that we have installed democracy in our country, the way we live through it, we may not be, and certainly are not, the most successful country in economical terms, but I think we are an extremely successful country in the way we live our democracy. Because indeed, it is a democracy. I think we move within reasonable political fields, and the whole thing just moves on, and there are no troubles in the streets, and it's fine.
It's peaceful, and you can't put a price tag on peace.
Yeah, exactly. And even if politics is, by definition, as I said before, a contentious subject, and it also is in Portugal, obviously, but I think that the way we live politics is something to be proud of. So I'm proud of Portugal, on that particular thing.
Yeah, it's actually a discussion I had with an American client of mine the other day, and it was one of the things that they actually they took note of. They said there doesn't seem to be these extremes. It's a kind of a shift a little bit to the right or a little bit to the left, but we're still somewhere in the middle. So there's the social and then the social democrats, but it's all kind of the same, but just one has different policies.
Yeah, but I mean, there is virtue in change,
Sure.
And the fact, that we're able to change and not, and that there is no drama associated with it is something that makes me extremely proud. The other day I was roaming through LinkedIn, and there was this post, which I'm trying to find right now, about this American chap who came to Portugal for the sabbatical, and
I saw it.
You saw it, didn't you? And the thing that I found extraordinary is that he talked about things that we take for granted. I found it. I'm going to read it to you now. I'm going to read just two things, which I think are quite important. Hold on. So this is a black man, okay, an affluent black man. He was obviously not, because I think he runs a consultancy. Mm. And he wrote two things that, again, we take for granted, which are quite extraordinary. And if you allow me, and I hope you allow me to, so his name is Rory Verrett. He's executive recruiter for diverse talent and a global thought leader on DEI, which I believe is a headhunter consultancy. And here's what he had to say about Portugal. And it fits into that peacefulness that you were talking about. So this is Rory talking. I loved not standing out. He wrote 5 points about the things he loved in Portugal in the 2 month sabbatical he passed in Portugal. I loved not standing out. I did not see one woman clutch her purse or look nervously behind herself when I walked behind them.
Yeah.
I felt like a human, not a black man, a man to be feared or mistrusted. I'm sure my American status helped, but in a culture largely free of guns, it was great to be anyone, everyone, and not a threat to public safety by my mere presence. Okay, now, if he was walking on the street and the woman was walking in front of him, there was no way this woman would ever know he was American. So the American status didn't help at all. He's just in a culture that, so he's a black man, so what? That's it. He's not associated with violence or anything. Yeah. And the other thing is what he wrote after that, which is inclusion is realized when it's felt, not as some abstract notion. Portugal is one of the most welcoming places I've ever seen. I felt included in family-owned taskas, fine dining establishments, and upscale stores, and I never felt rushed to leave. Though I would have understood, I was never slighted or demeaned for speaking in my real limited Portuguese. For every day of 60 days, I felt welcomed. Mm-hmm. And the last comment, I felt great to be a part of a community united against COVID-19. As of this post, 85% of Portugal has been vaccinated. There were no big protests about the vaccine or government-sanctioned social restrictions. COVID-19 was not politicized, and almost everyone I saw obliged with mask wearing and other restrictions. As a result, life in Portugal is returning to its pre-pandemic state. So this is an American who came to Portugal for the first time, and he's speaking about his experience here. So that kind of goes with the political, landscape that we were discussing.
Yeah. Why do you, Ricardo, why do you think, because my American clients that I was speaking to, they were saying that in America now with the political situation, it's almost impossible to have an educated debate because it becomes personal, it becomes aggressive, it becomes them versus us. And here we still seem to like to have an educated conversation. We might disagree on things, but I'm never going to attack you because you disagree with me. We have people in Portugal that don't agree about being vaccinated, but they don't make a big fuss about it, like it's happened in other places. But from a democratic point of view, do you think it's because we're such a young democracy that we remember the ideals that we have?
On the contrary, it's because we are an old country. It's not because we're a young democracy. It has to do with democracy, but only ever so slightly. It has to do with the fact that we've been living in a community for the last 900 years, and we're together. And we know that no matter what, if I disagree with you, that's going to make my life nasty the day after tomorrow because I'm going to bump into you again, or with your cousin, or with your sister. And that sense of community. This is a caricature. It's not because of that, because we don't bump to people every day. There are many people in Portugal I don't know, you don't know, of course, and obviously. It's just the fact that this pervasive sense of community prevails over everything else. And harmony, I think, is much prized by us all. And that has come at the cost of 900 years of bumping our heads together and, fighting the common fight and learning how to really live with somebody who is different and different from us. And don't forget, again, we have been in touch, and we'll talk about that later, with external cultures and races and religions, dating back to the beginning of our nationality. We fought our way through against, well, in that particular instance, against the Muslims. But ever since the beginning of Portugal is the product of Rome. We are, by the way, if you want to feel like you are with a people who looks exactly and behaves exactly like us, go to middle and southern Italy. They look like us, like the Portuguese. And we were populated by Romans and Roman soldiers who brought olive trees and wine and wine groves with them. So most of our culture, we tend to forget that does date back to the Roman Empire. And so that diversity in us coming together as a country, and the fact that we had to learn how to live within and with that diversity, I think is what is making things easier for us right now, I think.
Very interesting. Okay. And a historical event or a historical account that makes you Proud of Portugal.
I don't know if it makes me proud of Portugal, but it is the first time that I've seen it in writing by a Booker Prize winner and something that is worth it. It's not about a positive fact. It's a book published by a Mr. French, and the title is Born to Blackness. Okay. And it is an account of how the world came to be as it is today. And I think we've discussed this before in this podcast. The whole world today is the product of European expansion. Okay. That's why the Chinese use ties, or the Singaporean, there were no ties in China, or how I don't know, people in Japan work for big companies are called salaryman, which comes from salaryman. So I mean, this expansion of European culture made the world what it is today, with all of the good and bad things that come with that. Okay. Usually, however, historical accounts of how the world came to be as it is go back to the day of Columbus, and when Columbus reached the Americas, so 1492. Okay. Now, Mr. French begs to differ, and he says, no, the founding moment of the modern world is actually the Portuguese expansion into Africa. And for 100 years, after we first went to Africa in 1415, so it is many, many years before 1492. Okay, that's when we took Ceuta from Morocco, what is today Morocco, and from there the expansion onto the coast, the west coast of Africa. Okay, and then around the Cape of Good Hope and all of that. That expansion took 100 years. So until 1498. Almost 100 years, so 80 something years, 83 years, until 1498, which is the date when Vasco da Gama actually reached India. Okay, so those 80 something years, the Portuguese only explored Africa, and it was the riches brought from Africa, the gold and the slaves, unfortunately, that actually financed all that expansion. And because of the slave trade, it was then the taking of Black African people to the Americas with their cultures and their ability to produce riches, and found, powerful economies on the other side of the Atlantic. The Black Africans, it was the fact that they were brought there and able to produce there that actually transformed the Americas. It was not the white people that actually made the Americas the economical powerhouses that they later became. It was the Black people that were taken there as, unfortunately, slaves. Okay, so the argument of this man, Mr. French, is that, and the title of the book, again, I will repeat, is Born to Blackness, is that the founding moment or the founding movement behind the modern world, with its terrible things and with its good things, was actually the exploration of Africa exclusively by the Portuguese for 80-something years, and the fact that, unfortunately, they invented the slave trade, and with that slave trade, they were able to actually populate other lands across the sphere. So it is not something to be proud because of the terrible sufferings imparted on Africans by the Atlantic slave trade. So it's not something to be proud of, but it is an historical thing, and it is the first time that I've seen it written, and it's beautifully written. By the way, it's a book that I will recommend to anyone, especially somebody who is African or of African descent, to read the book, because it gives a stature to African people that they have never been given, which is the fact that they were the true creators of wealth in the New World and in other parts of the world. So there you go.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Very, very interesting. I read somewhere, I don't know if it was correct or not, was Portugal one of the first places to abolish slavery as well? I think
it was. Now you got to go back to the day. It was abolished in Portugal, and it was abolished in the letter of the law, but it continued happening for many years.
Unfortunately,
unfortunately, not only in Portugal, slavery continued in southern North America, so in the southern states of North America, until the War of Secession, which was well into the 1800s. It was Lincoln to put it. But then again, there were the Jim Crow laws, which perpetuated the apartheid, let's say, in America and in your own country, in South Africa. Apartheid endured until it was it in the 21st century or rather?
Oh, no, it was still in the 90s. We still had it. It was
in the 90s.
Yeah.
So all very unfortunate, but you can't argue with history. You can of course revisit it and realize that and look at things in different way in perspective. But that it is okay.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, moving on. One of your favorite subjects, architecture. A piece of architecture, a building that makes you proud of Portugal.
Yes, I was just to Porto recently. Because as you know, as I'm a non-executive director at Sonai, and so I stayed in one of those new hotels in an old building in downtown Porto in Rua das Flores. Okay, and it was a beautiful hotel. And downtown Porto has been almost fully restored, and it is now absolutely glorious. Not because it's grand, but because it's so homey, and it's the small houses and the cast iron verandas. It's just beautiful, and it's been restored to its previous glory. It's not. I mean, they've not changed stuff or did anything violent to the architecture. Just took it as it is. So it's really, really beautiful, and you should go to downtown Porto and to Rua das Flores if you ever have the opportunity. And just by that, there is a building which is really worth the visit, which is Estação de Caminho de Ferro de São Bento, which is the railway station in São Bento.
It's beautiful.
Take a look at those tiles inside.
Yeah,
it is just something that you look at it and you just stand in awe. It's just so beautiful. So go to Oporto and go to Estação de São Bento.
You see the tile?
Yeah, I see the tile.
It's from a little portion of that yeah. It's one of
São Bento. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Have you seen the smallest house in the world, or it's the smallest apartment in the world is in Porto?
I never saw it. No.
You walk down one of the tram lines,
right?
The one that goes towards the ocean along the river, and it's a little apartment that's and it's just this tiny little sliver of an apartment in between some of the other buildings. It's incredible.
Square meter apartment.
Yeah, it's something ridiculous. Like there's space for a bed basically, and you you lean over. You could probably lean off the side of your bed, brush your teeth, and cook some eggs. But Porto is beautiful, and it's maintained that little character and that kind of village feel to it. It's stunning. Yeah. My first visit to Porto was for São João, which was an experience.
Yes. Yeah, that's wild. Insane. That's a bit wild. Yeah.
Anyway, okay. Next thing, something made in Portugal.
Poveiras. Have you ever heard of poveiras?
No.
Okay. So this is the sweater.
Okay.
Made by the fishermen wives up in Povo de Varzim.
Okay. Povo de Varzim is up in the north. It's near to Porto.
Yes, it is near to Porto.
Yeah.
Now, there was recently an incident that you might have followed that a fashion brand in North America actually literally copied one poveira and sold it as fashion. Okay? So
for thousands.
It was what the Americans call cultural appropriation. Cultural appropriation. It was, I mean, in a way, it was a positive. So there was immediately an outcry that, they eventually retracted and said, they're really sorry. These are poveiras. They're made in Portugal proudly by the women of fishermen living in Povo de Varzim and so on and so forth. So the whole thing actually, it was a wonderful publicity stunt for poveiras. It was funny because they reproduced them to the point that there is a Portuguese coat of arms in front of the one they copied, and they even copied the coat of arms and still claimed that he was the original design. It was very funny. I don't know if it was Michael Kors. Please forgive me if I'm not.
I need to Google that.
Google that. Poveiras. So it's wonderful, though. It's wonderful. It's woolen sweaters that you actually pull over, and they're worn by fishermen. They're usually white, that raw white of wool, and they're really beautiful. And they still use them to this day. They're really quite extraordinary.
Those guys still have quite a rough. Fisherman's life is never easy, but they don't even. If I'm not mistaken, they don't even have a harbor there. They still have to pull out directly off the beach.
In Povo de Varzim, they probably still go onto the beach. They still kind of maroon their butts into the beach. Yes,
it's like Nazaré in the old days before there was the marina.
In the old days, but I'm not sure about Povo. I think they have a proper harbor or a pontoon at least there, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, we had a photographer on the podcast who's from there, a guy called Daniel Rodriguez, and he won the World Press photo for a photo that he took, I think, in Papua New Guinea or somewhere there. He had given up on photography actually, and he randomly went on a trip and he took this photo, and his girlfriend at the time told him, "You need to submit this photo," and he won. And oh my God, his career was reignited because of that photo. So he's still a photographer today, and he's from there. He's from Povo de Varzim.
So finally, you want
just explain the poveira. Is it like a poncho? Is it
no?
Is it sleeveless?
It's a full sweater with
full
sleeves.
Sweater.
Okay.
So what makes it different to normal sweaters?
Kind of red and blue embroidering. No, I mean it's knitted. So it's knitted into the thing with drawings. Okay, it's really nice. I mean, if you find one to add to your podcast, you will see, and try to find. I'm sure that if you Google it, you will see the controversy around this cultural appropriation by an American.
Definitely, we need to Google it. We'll leave it. We'll put it in the show notes. The sweater, that'll be funny. Ricardo, one thing that you'd like people to remember from our conversation.
Yesterday we had the visit of Christine Lagarde.
Who?
Christine Lagarde. She's the chairman of the Central European Bank, previously managing director of the IMF. And as a good French person, because she's French, or any European, I think for that matter, they try to be sensitive to local cultures. So she spoke a couple of sentences in Portuguese, and it was nice, of course, heavily accented, because as you know, the French are hopeless at speaking foreign languages, and she's no exception. She's very fluent, but the accent is just overwhelming. Anyway, so and again, she did quote a sentence which goes into the last point of our conversation. And also ties back to the fact that we are a peaceful democracy, and all of the things that I read that Rory wrote about Portugal. And I think it explains why we live together and are able to cope with adversity in a way which I think stands out in the world. And the sentence is from Fernando Pessoa, and it's got a beautiful translation in English. So I will say it to you, and it also helps to explain again why we are the way we are. And it goes like this: I bear the wounds of all the battles I avoided. Isn't that wonderful?
Bear the wounds of all the battles I avoided.
Wow. I avoided, and so when you avoid confrontation, which is something we excel at in Portugal, avoiding confrontation, we still have wounds. They're, of course, buried within our soul. They're there. It's not that we don't want to fight back, but sometimes by avoiding the battle, and keeping the wound inside you, you strive for a greater good. And I think that is a lesson that the Portuguese have learned by avoiding, many, many battles. So there you go.
You think that's why we have a simple life here, is because of that attitude of avoiding conflict, avoiding fighting, trying to find a solution,
and complexity in general. We shy away from complexity. We try to find the simple solutions and the simple answers. Something that Rory Verrett wrote also that I didn't quote here was that he loved the fact that the Portuguese could just sit on a cafe and look at the ships going out in the Tagus River and not being anguished at all about the fact that they were not multitasking or going in or running into a meeting they just had to be at, and the fact that we can just sit down and have a pastry with a beaker, and that is part of life, and as rich a part of life as multitasking and going to multiple meetings and trying to take $1 million decisions. I think is something that is embedded into our culture. So it is simplicity at all and every level of society and the way we live life. I don't think we learned it. I mean, we came to it, that's it. It's just like the way we do fish. We just put it on a grill, olive oil, and that's it. Everything, when it's reduced to its simplest form, I think is best expressed.
You see, I think almost every episode you've spoken about the fish. So when you come up here, I'll buy you fish.
I had fish the last time I was there.
Where did you have it?
Yeah. Sorry?
Where did you have it? In São Martinho?
There's this walk around São Martinho do Porto, just in front of the beach. Okay, and there are many restaurants there, and it was just one of them. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name.
Mm-hmm. It was good.
It was good. Yeah, it was good. Again, it's not Michelin star stuff, but it's just the fish was good. It was wonderful. That's it. Fresh. Simple. Good. Yeah, very good.
Brilliant. Ricardo, thank you so much for being on the podcast again.
Thank you, Dylan. It's always a pleasure, as I said.
And we'll see you again soon for another edition in a couple of months.
Hopefully so. Yeah.
Wonderful. For now, I'm going to let you call it.
So that's a wrap.
So thank you once again to Ricardo, and thank you to all of you for listening. Please subscribe, share with your friends, give us a thumbs up, and please leave a comment or a review. We'd love to hear from you. And as we say in Portugal, força. Welcome to the simple life.